Welcome to Living with God. I've done this Life with God class many times in different parishes, which is kind of like the introductory story of salvation. It follows the pattern of the Creed, and then baptism and Lord's Supper, and the Ten Commandments and the Lord's Prayer. And in there along the way there is a section on confession. That runs 12 or 13 weeks. And when I was in Michigan serving, I did that, maybe 10, 12 times I had that. And then I said, I'd like to take the members of the congregation through the whole Bible. I made it through 50 weeks. And then I got called to Concordia St. Paul, and so I didn't actually finish that whole thing, but it was a neat opportunity for about 40 of our members to go through and see just what's in the Scriptures. The one thing that I wasn't surprised by, but that was nice to see, is that there is gospel and good news in every section. And so I want to help you be able to get an idea, a little bit of some of the things that are here. I have provided notes. There is a handout for today, the one Living with God, the Torah, which kind of gives some general background. I will let you read that and follow through with that. If you want to make other notes on things, you can. You won't always get this many pages for what I'm going to do, but at least for now, that will be somewhat of the background. There are no tests. You can take any notes you want to, of course. I will answer questions, but I'm going to try to see if the first hour I can't pull together things from the story. And then we'll have a short break, and then I have a variety of questions posed, more for this first one than for some of the others, where I'd like you talking to each other a little bit, and just thinking through some things, and then we'll draw it together at the end, maybe the last 20 minutes, 25 minutes or so. One of the things that has bothered me, and I know it's bothered a lot of people about Bible studies, is people get together and they all sit down and they read a passage and they say, well, I think it means this. I think it means this. I think it means this. Well, I think it means this. I don't see how you get that out of it. And it sort of dribbles off always. This approach and the Lifelight courses are somewhat similar with kind of drawing things together. But this approach would say, okay, we can try and think things through, but let's at least get some kind of clarity at the end of it. So there's a time for you to be getting to know other people. You may talk about the questions I have posed. You may have some other question that came up. And then at the end, we'll try and draw some more things together and kind of process it through. I'm going to be taping this because eventually I would like to provide these summaries for the mission fields around the world as well. And I have been in Liberia. That's the one that's most on my heart, but I know in places like the Philippines as well, those who would understand English, that will draw it all together. The framework of it right now is that it's going to be 8 10-week sessions. Okay, I may make that 9 10-week sessions, and then just do one session on the history of the church, or I may make that 2. So in essence, I'm aiming for kind of like 10 weeks in the fall, 10 weeks in the winter and spring for the next 5 years. Probably aren't going to all be here for all that. Okay? Something else happens. Something else comes along. You know, somebody invites you out for coffee or something like that. But I will have these available. Todd, who is in the back, Todd Pierce, is going to work to have a kind of a dedicated website for a YouTube channel that we will put these on. So if you miss one, then you can look at that and at least get this part of it along the way. What I want to start out with is just kind of a little bit of an overview of Genesis 1 to 11. It's often called the prehistory of the Bible because the name that's going to appear and the story that's going to appear most of all is going to be the name Abraham. And Abraham and his descendants. And so this kind of leads up to, why does God choose Abraham? But it also gives us some very, very foundational things about what is life and what is this all about. I will repeat this probably more times than you will even want to hear. But I want you to hear the Scriptures as God's side of the story about life on this planet. What he sees, what he did. I really want to spoil, at least to some extent, the notion that what we are doing is combing through the Bible, looking for God's rules. And if we obey them, then God will bless us. I instead want us to hear, as Martin Luther found very clearly, that this is a book of God's promises. And they aren't always maybe going to be fulfilled in exactly the same way we read it. There may be insights or different ways that it happens, but that this is God interacting with a fallen humanity. What does he do, both in his judgment and in his grace? So Genesis 1 to 11, in some ways, is going to be the story, first of all, of how God creates everything, and then focuses in on how God creates human beings, and in the process of creating human beings, creates Eve from Adam, and then they leave him. That little bit I want to take a good bit of our hour today to talk about. So God is gracious enough to make human beings. They pull away from him. They could have gone clunk right away. Instead, God says, I'm casting you out of the garden, but I will still bless you. Even outside the garden, I will still be with you out there. But everything, every yearning in the human heart, even the ones people don't know, is to get back in that whole relationship with God. We can't do it. There's a cherub that says, you don't get in here. But the whole story of the entire scriptures is God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself and saying, I'm going to bring you back in. So everything in the whole story is not about what we do, but what God has done. We respond within that framework, but it's what has God done for us. And so I want to try and keep that kind of front and center for you as you look at all of this, and I'll come back to it many, many times. God is gracious. Adam and Eve have Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel. And God says, you go wander. You're not going to be able to be a farmer anymore. But he puts a mark on his forehead and says, those who kill you, 7 of their family members are to die. Then comes the flood. After one of those long stories of all the lists of names, then comes the flood. And something about, kind of difficult to pick that out and put it together, about the sons of God and the daughters of men, and somehow that evil comes into the world, and God says, the wickedness of the human heart is so severe, I am going to wipe out everybody except Noah and his family find favor in the eyes of God. And so the sin is there, the consequences come, but Noah and his family are spared. Then the last of the 4 vignettes is the Tower of Babel, where everybody says, we're going to make a name for ourselves. And this is the great one. I will not do it for you because I'm on camera. For 2 reasons I won't do it for that. One, because I would disappear. But if any of you ever saw Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, God, the story says, these people were making this tower way up in the heavens. God gets crawling on his hands and knees and says, I wonder if I can find that tower there. I wonder where the thing is. He keeps kind of looking around for it like the dad looking for his kids in the grass. And so they weren't accomplishing what they wanted to. And God scatters them everywhere. And there's no story at the end of that to say, and here's the grace that God gave, like Adam and Eve being clothed and still God being with them, or the Cain mark on his forehead, or Noah and his family. And so the entire rest of the Old Testament is a story about God saying, here's what I'm going to do through the family of Abraham to bring a blessing to everybody who was scattered and whose languages were confused. You know where the other bookend for that story is, for chapter 11? Pentecost, where people of all the nations and languages in their own ears hear from their own perspective, what has God done? So everything in between there says, what did God do to be able to bring that blessing out to all nations and now to all of us as well? So that's the little bit of the overview. I'm not going to worry about if I get too much into the flood or the Tower of Babel story today, because I want to make sure I do 1, 2, and 3 very well. So I've done a little bit with them, and we'll go from there then. So, Genesis 1. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the dome, and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth." And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky." So God created the great sea monsters, and every living creature that moves of every kind, with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind, and God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful, and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning the fifth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle, creeping things, and wild animals of the earth of every kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and the cattle of every kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the ground." God said, "See, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day God finished the work that he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created. And that's where we'll stop at the moment. So, how many days are there in the creation?
6.
How many days are there in the creation?
7.
7. We're always talking about the 6 days of creation. But God creates the seventh day too. Not that he makes it out of nothing. He sets it aside like he's been setting other things aside. He sets apart the waters above from the waters below and all sorts of things. He builds in to this earth the 7 days of creation. Very interesting thing about Hebrew. The word for face is panim. And that really is a plural because there are various parts to it, our eyebrows and our ears and all, our nose and mouth and all that. The word for what is in front of me is lifnei, lipanai, what is to my face. So we can use that in two ways. Lifnei, we might use that in a temporal sense. I came down the stairs before I came in the room. Or we might use it in a spatial sense. You are sitting before me. You are in front of me. And so the Hebrew time says that on the seventh day of the week, what God does is he sits back and flings his suspenders a couple of times and says, I like that. And so he looks and surveys what happened on days 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1, says, yeah, that's what I intended. My Dr. Father Hans Walter Wolf talked about the concept as being in a rowboat. Where do you look in a rowboat? What are you facing? Where you came from. You see what you've already gone through. What's behind you is in the future. Okay? And so some of you might have had or had the experience of sitting way in the back in a station wagon. You do the same kind of thing. You see where you came from. Okay, because that one flip seat used to be where you'd look out the back window for it if there were like 8 or 9 children in your family and you were the one that got to sit in the back. And so the concept of time says that the day of rest is not the day to sleep in till noon. It's the day to reflect on what has happened in the previous week and to say for us and for people in the Old Testament era, look what God did. He promised he would be with us. Here are the things that happened that brought blessings to us. And so the day of rest, the day of worship, is not the day on which we are to get bawled out for what we didn't do last week and get beat into submission to try better next week. It's a day to remember this is what the Lord has done with us, and as we go into a new week, then that'll go on. Now, why don't we worship on Saturday? Why do we worship on Sunday?
Resurrection.
Christ rose on Easter, and so the church has always said this is the beginning of the new creation. But the concept is the same one. We are gathered together to praise the Almighty God for what he has done in giving us life everlasting, and we ask him to help us acknowledge when we've walked away from that, and to help us recognize that as he is our Lord, he will go with us into the future. And so worship is the time, first of all, to hear and be reminded of and say thank you for what has happened, and then to ask him to guide us in carrying out his will in the week ahead. Now, I've got a little illustration, my only one, so I use it up on the first day and I don't have any more. But without looking down now, and I know some of you have looked at this story many times, without looking down, what was created on each of the days? What was created on day 1? Light. And darkness?
There's a separation.
Was darkness created?
No, darkness was there.
Darkness was there, right? Okay, so it says God made light. And he separated the light from the darkness. One of the most important words in the entire chapter is separating. Distinguishing, putting something here, doing something here, doing something there. So, he does first of all, he creates light on day 1. What's created on day 2? Separation of what? The waters, right? The waters that are above here it says, dome, from the waters that are below the dome. Now I have an interesting little question for you. When were the waters created?
Well, it says it before that the Spirit was hovering.
Over the face of the waters.
Yes.
It doesn't say he made them.
Right.
It says he was hovering over them.
Yeah.
Now, I just want to stay with what the story actually is here. It doesn't tell us how everything that's there came to be, as much as saying, how did the chaos of what was there get put in order? It's really telling us, how'd you get a house to live in, called the earth? Okay, so that doesn't say God didn't make everything, but it's, and there's some complications about ways people look at that. But so anyway, day 2, the dome separates the waters above from the waters below. Terrible, terrible translation to call that sky. Because the word rakia in Hebrew for dome, what's the old King James word for it? The firmament. Yeah, the firmament. Something firm. They used to have something in Minneapolis called the Metrodome. Not metronome, but Metrodome. Right now it's an interesting configuration of all sorts of stuff going up in the air in crazy directions. That was very helpful for me to be able to teach the concept. There is something above it, there's something below it. And the word rakia in Hebrew actually is the word that's used if you would take a lump of bronze, let's say, and take a ball-peen hammer that you made out of steel, which didn't probably exist when the bronze was there. But anyway, you guys know what a ball-peen hammer is, where it's round on the one side, and if you gradually started hitting that and flattening it out, I saw someone on TV one Sunday who actually, they had something underneath it. They made a beautiful goblet. And sometimes you'll see this in communion where there's a bunch of little hole, little hits, dimples on the outside. So they have simply not smoothed it out completely, but that is formed and fashioned. That's the word that's used for the firmament. It's something solid up there, a roof. Okay? That separates the waters above from the waters below. How about day 3? I have a couple things on day 3. Not yet. Not yet. Day 1, turn the light on. Day 2, we put in a roof. Day 3,
Separate the land.
the land from the water. So we need a floor. So when I was a paper boy, sometimes in the springtime when the snow was melting, it took longer to deliver the papers because snowball fights were just too important. And the one thing that I learned was when it's about 30 degrees or even more than that, what happens to your gloves? They get very wet because when you're making those wonderful ice balls, the water squishes out and then you make that real hard ball. You can't do that when it's 20 below because you don't have enough strength to push that water out. I don't understand the physics of that, but anyway, that's why you can't make a snowball when it's 30 below, but 30 above. Great days for making snowmen and all that. Well, God kind of goes like this, and he takes the muck and he squeezes the dirt out, and then the waters are to the side. So, got the roof, now you have the floor. And what else goes on that 3rd day then?
Plants.
Plants. You got to put a couple potted plants in here and there. Okay. Nobody has ever made a plant. Nobody's ever made a seed. Not a single person in the story of this earth has ever made a corn seed. All they can do is take, adjust, maybe change by bringing something together with something else. But all of this goes back there, puts it in there. Potted plant in the window, okay? Day 4. Well, let's do the, it says in Genesis 1 that the earth was formless and empty. So what happens on the first 3 days? He gives it the forms. Light, up and down, wet and dry. Put a couple potted plants in there, a little bit of wheat and barley off to the side. Now we're going to fill it with something. Formless and empty. I worked for a cement man. First you hop off the truck, you take off the 2x4s, you position them the right way, you fill in sand underneath that so that you get about a 3 3/4 inch sidewalk. After it's dried, and we've poured the concrete and it's dry, then you take the forms away. And what you see is the more visible parts of what needed some forms along the way. I doubt that you'll get any good driveways or sidewalks without having some forms that are used to hold that all together. So, day 4, what do we get?
Sea creatures.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Oh, lights in the heavens?
Okay, the lights in the heavens, what do we call them in the text?
Stars.
Stars.
Moon.
In the text, before it says the stars, it says 2 things. What does it say?
The greater light and lesser
The
light.
greater light and the lesser light. I'll come back to that in just a minute. Okay? Doesn't even call them the sun and the moon. The greater light and the lesser light. All right, so, got the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars also. It's kind of a, and by the way, the stars. Planets aren't mentioned, unless they would be involved in the Kokavim and the stars. So that's day 4. What was made on day 1?
Light.
What's made on day 4? Lights.
Yeah.
What was made on day 2? The roof. So there's an up and a down. What's on day 5?
Creatures in the sea.
The creatures in the sea and in the air. The birdies and the fishies. That's day 5. So you made that space. Now, day 5, you fill it in. Day 3, we got the land and the plants. Now what do we get on day 6? Animals, wild and domestic, and human beings. Human beings to take care of the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. God puts them in charge of the creation, and it's all to work fine, hunky-dory. All right, and then the 7th day is the day of rest. Now I have to ask you all at this point to please close your eyes. Okay? I want to put something up there, and I don't want you to see the whole thing yet. So just close your eyes or put your eyes down or something, and I'll see if I can somehow make this work before I come back. I may have to close this one out and go back to the other one. Okay, keep your eyes closed, please. All right, now you can look. Unless the closed eyes really made you feel good, and then you can keep on. All right, here's how it begins. There's nothing, and I can't make everything perfect with this, but some of my friends over at my confirmation classes over at Jehovah helped me, and my son Daniel helped me, and so let's see. We get enter to it. All right, so day 1, we get light. What's going to happen on day 2? The dome. Is the dome going to be above the light or below the light?
Over it.
In it.
In it?
Yeah.
If it separates waters from waters, do I put the dome under the word light or above it? Oh, golly. Under it? Okay, I'll explain that to you in a minute as well. That's fine. So, all right, now what does it separate? The waters that are above the dome from the waters that are under the dome. Actually, there were not supposed to be 2 waves. I hit the button twice. That's why that looks right. So that's day 2. Day 3, what do we need now?
We need land.
Well, good. Now we got the light. All right?
Yeah.
The next one is inaccurate, but it's the best I could do with the fun I wanted to have. Why is it inaccurate?
Plants instead.
Well, trees are part of that. I mean, it's all the vegetation, but what's wrong with it?
It keeps changing seasons.
Yeah, it keeps changing seasons. Yeah, it's got 4 seasons, so. But I liked it, and so it's mine, so I got to do as I want. All right, so that's the first 3 days. Now what are we going to bring in?
You can bring the animals, the fish.
Animals.
Not yet. You're jumping to day 5.
The lights in the eyes.
We need the lights first. The lights. The lesser and the greater. Now, do I put those above the dome or below the dome?
Below.
They'd have to be
Within it?
below.
No, it has to be in there.
Why would it have to be below?
Then the dome would cover it if it was above, right?
Dome would cover it if it's above. Buy that answer for $1. Here comes the sun. I saw something this morning, those of you who are members here at Jehovah, or at Emmaus. Where is that? Those of you who are here at Emmaus, the original sanctuary is to our west. So where is it? It's right over there, right? Or to our east, I mean. To our east, the original part of it. The sun this morning was shining on the altar rail up in church, which is over here. How in the world? I've never seen the sun shining on it before. And it was lined up so it came through the 2 windows of the original sanctuary and shone right into the church. So I took a picture of it because that doesn't happen very often. I don't know if it's a few days it'll do it, but the sun was just coming up as I was coming over here this morning, and that red rubber ball. So anyway, we're going to put the moon, well, we put the moon in here as well on the other side. Now, where are we going to put the stars? Above or below?
Hello. Bless you.
Or put them in the dome?
Then we're going to put in the dome.
Okay.
Now here's the deal. If you, the best illustration, well, there's a couple of them. One is my grandma's old umbrella. My grandma kept her umbrella for a long, long time, long after it should have been kept. But that umbrella, if you would have held it up and opened it in the summertime, it had little holes in it. And so you could get water too, but you could see the sun through it. The other illustration I would use, remember, it's a solid dome. There are holes in it. It's like an upside down colander. What do you see when you see the stars? The light that's above it. They saw that the stars all stayed together. They might be at different places in the sky, but they all stayed together, except for the wandering ones. Planeo in Greek means to wander. So the wandering stars, they would wander around a little bit. But the other ones, they all kind of stayed together. So their conceptual framework was that those were pinprick holes, and you could see the light above from that. How many of you have ever seen a sunrise? For those who didn't vote, how many of you have seen a sunset then? Someone who hasn't seen either one of them, we're really in trouble. I've never seen a sunrise in my life. Never seen a sunset in my life. I have observed something that from the way we talk looks like the sun is going up in the sky, when in reality, what are we doing? We're spinning. My brother Dale says that where we are, it's about 750 miles an hour. So, as we spin around at the equator, it's 1,000 miles an hour. So, if you're tired, tell someone, I'm going 750 miles an hour. Don't expect me to be tired. And it may not work, but anyway, it worked for me right now. So, we have the stars, and so, from their perspective, these are just the words that they use to describe the various parts of it. When somebody tries to get at us and say, well, this is not scientifically accurate, then ask them if they've ever seen a sunrise, and then say, well, that's not scientifically accurate. How could you talk that way? Because from our perspective, that's what we see. And if you're in the space shuttle, you see, what, 18 of them a day? Something like that. So there are a variety of different things that from our perspective, and that's simply the words that were used at their point. So here come the birdies. Jaws. See this, the water is throwing these fish right out of the air over there. Day 6. Okay.
Humans.
Let's not jump ahead too far. Here's the tigers, who did not look so good last night, apparently. I'm a Detroiter. And the domestic. And now, every time it says good, 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 good. For the last time, it says very good.
Yeah.
That's God clapping. Okay? And so, this is the story of the creation. Now, if you would look at the water, you would see that the water is part of the chaos that can wreak havoc in our lives, that God has put back most of the time. Tsunamis we can talk about, and all sorts of things like that. And so what you have here is God establishes boundaries, generally, but Baal in northern Syria was the storm god. In Egypt, the main god was Re, spelled R-E, the god of the sun. In Iraq and the entire Mesopotamian region, the moon is worshipped. They don't have a red cross there. What do they have? A red crescent. A red crescent. And every archaeological dig. Why? Because in Egypt, every day the sun shone. You could know for sure you're going to see the sun. But in Iraq, every spring, the snow up in the Caucasus Mountains started melting, and they would have big floods. They called it an alluvial plain, where it brings out the soil from farther up and brings that all over everything. In fact, I remember when St. Louis area got flooded back in the early 90s, one farmer said, "It brings in so much good new soil for us, we can take this once in a while. We'll pay for that pretty quickly." So, you count the times the moon goes by, and when you get to 11 or 12, however you're going to do it, you head for the hills. You go away from the valleys so you don't get washed away. So the moon is helping you to find some order even in the midst of chaos. So this is the Old Testament creation creed. Some people say the sun made this. Some, the moon say it made all this or protects it all. Some, they worry about this. They worry about death. All these things. God made all this stuff. He says, I made it. God is the subject of the chapter. He says, I did all this. And we have times when people will get into all sorts of fights and try and get all sorts of science books out and try and throw them at each other and try and find ways to argue about every little thing. I don't think that's even what the story is about. It says God made all this. And He built it so that it would work. And, we can certainly look at other things, but I don't think it tells the whole story, and I don't think that's its point. What's the end of the chapter about? And unfortunately, and I mean this in the only sense I can say it, unfortunately, they divided it at the end of chapter 1 instead of going through the first part of chapter 2, because they said, it's 6 days of creation instead of 7. They should have gone a little farther before they drew the line. Because this really does end at this point. The end of chapter 1 is going to say that God sets aside time for us to rest as well as to work. Work is not a curse. God put them there to take care of it. Chapter 2, the end of it is going to be about family. A man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife. Now, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit just to say something. I'll come back to it another time. There are only 2 imperatives among the 10 words, what we call the 10 Commandments. Only 2 things that actually say, do something. The rest of them all say, don't do something. That's the third one. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. And the fourth one, honor your mother. Well, that's Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. God built us that way. He says, you go ahead and do that. You're built to do that. That's what's natural for you, is to be at peace in your family, 4, and at peace with your God and celebrating that, 3. The rest of them say, stay away from this, stay away from that. So, anyway, those are a few things about chapter 1. In chapter 1, God does the naming. In chapter 2, Adam is going to do the naming of the things around him. So God names the big stuff here. All right, now I'm going to go back to my... Alrighty, so I'm not going to read all of chapter 2 through, but I just talk about some of that. yet why this is going up here. All right, as long as I'm looking at this on my sheet here, to be created in God's image, God says take care of everything. That's what he wants them to do. He says a couple of things he doesn't want them to do. We're going to get to that more in chapter 2. He doesn't want them to be in control of life, and he doesn't want them to leave him. Those are going to be our two trees in the garden. So here it tells them in chapter 1, you're built to enjoy being creatures in my presence. That's where you're going to be at peace, where you're going to find your great joy. So chapter 2, after God rests on the seventh day, then chapters 2 and 3 zero in very much on the actual story of Adam and Eve. And I'm assuming that some of you have had a chance to read that through in advance. If you look at that, all of a sudden, you see lots of names of lots of places. What geographical names did you see in chapter 1? None. Chapter 2, name some of them for me. You can look, that's fine. The Euphrates. What goes with that one usually? The Tigris. Eden. The Pishon. The Gihon. And notice how there are 4 rivers that come up, or the water comes up from under the ground and goes in 4 directions. So we see it as the Tigris and Euphrates going down into the Persian Gulf. But there, which would have been probably at the southern end of it, it talks as if the water goes out and then goes in all directions. So you really don't need rain. Rain can be rather damaging, but this kind of gentle flooding of the waters out, that would be kind of a different thing. The book of Ezekiel is going to talk about how water comes up out of the temple and goes forth into the land. So you don't have to wonder, can you make the Baals make it rain? That's for another day. But so it's in chapter 2 it says that God breathes the breath of life into Adam, and he becomes a living being. Now sometimes we'll find 2 different ways that the word breath is used, or spirit. Sometimes it just talks about the animated creatures, so the animals and human beings that have the breath of God breathed into them. Other times it's going to talk in a deeper sense about a relational sense with the Spirit of God. And so what we're going to see here in chapter 2 is that first of all God breathes the breath of life, and Adam becomes a living nephesh, a living being. And so the word spirit in that sense is deeper than just your soul and your body. It kind of covers the entire whole thing. And so the Greeks talk, the Greek language will talk about soul and body and spirit. But Luther already points out that here you've got a living being. And actually it's the sound made in the throat as the air is going in and out. So to be alive means to have a relationship with the Almighty God and be at peace with Him. How many people had that at the beginning? 2. Adam and Eve. Since then, how many have had it when they were born?
None.
Jesus. And He's the one who gives up His life for everybody else, so they can all have it back. Our job is not to make people become Christian or get them to live a Christian life. Our job is to tell them what God has done for them in saving and redeeming them and restoring them to that relationship. That's what a Christian is. Someone who loves other people with Christ's forgiving love. It's no, I'm a Christian, I try hard to pay my taxes and do all the gardening and all of it. That's all fine, and it's part of taking care of the creation, but the drive within us is the drive to be at one with every human being in Christ. And that's what was there in the beginning. And so Adam, he gives names to all the different kinds of things, and so he's assigning the categories. He's not looking at a minor bird and saying Matilda. Okay, but he is talking about bear and lion and tiger and all that, that he acknowledges the categories within which God has given the creation. He says, here's what I see going on there. I see these different kind of creatures, and so we've got the cows and the sheep and the goats and domestic animals, and we've got the others that are out there, the leopards and all of that. And so he is giving, kind of acknowledging that. But the important thing is, there was no one who was, as the Hebrew says, kenegdo, like him. Someone who would be opposite him. Now obviously, males and females do not have the same bodies. But the idea is, there is no one to complete him, no one to be on the same level working with him. And so then God takes the rib and fashions it and gives life to Eve and sews up the place with flesh. So the first surgery that's ever done is already there. And says that God makes, using some of that which was right from Adam into a woman, and Isha to go along with him who is an Ish in the Hebrew. And so we kind of have that in English with man and woman. Mann und Frau in German, that doesn't quite work the same way. But we've got the word man in the word woman, and that there is some kind of a connection for us as human beings. So the story of this now is that the garden is there. He says, take care of that. And he puts two trees in there. One of them gets accentuated a little bit more. But let's think about those two trees. The tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. A lot of people quit and they just say, well, the tree of knowledge. Well, that's not quite far enough. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, this is where I get so far off, I don't know if I'll ever get back. Does evil exist?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
It has to.
Yes, it is.
Not at that point. Not at this point.
Does evil exist today?
Yes.
Yes.
Really? Here we go. Here we go, Janelle. Here we go. Does evil exist in the hearts of man?
Yes.
You're asking if it's a noun or
An adjective. I'm asking if it's a noun or an adjective. Does green exist?
Yes.
What are we actually seeing here? We are seeing that the white light around us absorbs everything that this cup is made of except the green wavelength, which it bounces off. But what I'm asking, does green itself exist? I'm going to say no. A green cup exists, but green is an adjective. It describes something about the cup. This is not an easy one, okay? So if you don't understand it, just leave me alone.
So you're saying it's evil works, but evil doesn't exist.
If evil exists, then God created it.
Yes.
Good is everything the way God made it to be. Evil is how we would adjectively describe everything that works against the way God made it to be. Otherwise, we make evil a power and good a power, and then we're around fighting evil. A church's job is not to fight evil. Maybe it is for Superman, but it's not for us. Our job is to proclaim Christ and Him crucified. Love people for whom He died. If He wants to undo the evil in the world, that's His business. Vengeance is mine, I'll repay, says the Lord. But see, if I have good and evil, then it's God over here, and who's over here? The devil, Satan. As if Satan is his own power. When we know from the book of Revelation, Satan is a fallen angel. One who went against the way God had made him to be and got thrown out. Just like Adam and Eve got thrown out. And so, if I say good exists or evil exists, then I'm going to try to stay away from the evil and try and get myself toward the good. But if good and evil is descriptive of what's with the way God built it or against it, then the job is not to fight evil, but to yearn for being what God made us to be. Adam and Eve knew good when they were created. They didn't know evil. Just like there was a day in my life when I did not know what it was like to get burned. Now I know what it's like to get burned. I can never go back to the other one again. Good, and my illustration for this is my famous airplane story. Can't come up with a better one. Think of the two worst things you could do in an airplane. Well, my quickie answer is...
Kill the pilot.
Huh?
Don't kill the pilot.
Well, kill the pilot. And this I came up with... Huh?
Don't kill the pilot.
No, I'm talking about the two worst things you could do.
Oh,
One would be kill the pilot, and I did this long before 9/11. The other is jump out with without a parachute. And sooner or later, well, you're free of the plane. What did Adam and Eve do? Good was everything in the garden. Evil is everything outside of it. Falling to your eternal death. That's what they chose to do, as we're going to look in chapter 3 now. That's what they did to pull away from God. They said, we don't want to be under you. We want to be on the same level as you are. My children are always going to be my children. If they wouldn't be on the same level with me, you know what I'm going to do? Write them out of my will. You want to be on the same level with me, I'll write you out of my will. Okay, because then you're saying I'm fine on my own. They haven't put in for that yet. But
they didn't know about death.
the day you take of the fruit of the tree, you will surely die.
But
Now-
before they took that, or I mean, before they got talked into that, they were, let me use the word, many gods. They didn't know death.
Okay?
Everything was good.
Yeah.
So
And God says, you can lose all of this, boys and girls.
did he actually say that? He just
said-
said, don't touch that tree.
Yes.
No, he didn't say touch it. He said,
Well, you know,
well, you see, when Eve says, don't even touch it, we're not even supposed to touch it, she's added to the story a little bit. But you can almost hear Adam like Eve is a 3-year-old in a china shop. Don't even touch that, you know. But well, let's look at chapter 3. All right, let's read that one through. Can't read everything, but 1 and 3 I'm going to read. I am going to ask you your indulgence this time only, that I'm going to go a little bit longer with the first one. I will find my way to be done with the other ones, but this one is so foundational. Yes.
Clarify just for me again, the good and evil. Good is doing with God in His way, and evil is separating from God and not doing.
And acting against Him.
It's the act.
Yes.
I think.
So it's a way we would describe the action. We say, well, that's an evil action. You know, like somebody says, well, is it a sin to do this or that? Well, you know, people start fighting about that then. Is it a sin to have 1 beer, 2 beers, 3 beers, 2 beers if I'm this tall, 3 beers if I'm this tall? You know, is it okay to have wine? Is it okay to, you know, is it okay if I eat 4 carrots instead of 3? And you start micromanaging the thing. There's a sense of how do I live and take care of who I am. And so the idea behind it is, if I buy into good and evil as both existing, then there is another power that God has to deal with. In the very early church's study, they used to talk about Jesus paying the ransom to the devil. And at a certain point in the early church, they said, that's not really adequate. That's one side of it, you know, one angle to talk about the concept, but that's not enough, because Jesus actually delivers us from the wrath of His Father. Get out of here. Get out of that garden. And Jesus is the one that can bring us back in at peace with Him. And so that's the deepest level. Luther picks that up very clearly, that he says, apart from knowing God in Christ, we don't know if God or the devil is working in our lives. And so a lot of things, we'll come up with our nice...
Over again, will you please?
If Luther says, how am I to know, quote, why did I get cancer? We make an idol. We make idolatry out of it, in my mind. When we start coming up with something like, well, God has a plan, God has a purpose, there must be a reason for it. And we have no way of figuring out what that is. But then we try to live with that. And so God has, when it says, I have plans for you in Jeremiah 29, it says, I have plans for you for peace and not for evil. What I'm going to do for you is never going to be evil. But we are in a broken world, and He's not delivering us from every last aspect of it. And so if I say, well, God wants me to get that job and then I don't get it, then am I going to say it's a bad God? I can make up God in my own image, and then He doesn't fulfill everything I want, and say, what kind of God is that? He says, I'm above all that. And we'll look at that a little bit more when we get to the 10 words in Exodus. I see popcorn going off all over the place. Yes?
Okay, so you're saying that God did not create evil and He did not create good then either?
Evil and good don't exist.
He didn't.
They are He created things that He said were very good.
Right.
So He creates the universe. He creates the earth. He creates it functioning. But to say that He creates good, like somebody created this cup, it's not something that sits out there. There are creatures like Satan and others that we would call evil. But when someone says this is evil personified, they would say this person is acting against everything everyone thinks is the way it ought to be. And so, in that sense, no, He didn't create good. Good is an adjective to say, yeah, that's the way I built it. That's not, I like that. And so it gets us rid of fighting evil or trying to promote good. I mean, we can say, well, I want to promote good by having good health laws or good voting laws or good laws for politics and things like that. But in this spiritual, in this deepest sense, good is what He uses to describe what's there, rather than that it exists like the sun exists or the moon exists or the stars exist. Okay, a couple others. Jake?
It's interesting that Jesus began His ministry by having to deal with evil personified.
Mm-hmm.
The devil came to Him and offered everything. And then in Jesus' ministry, He is constantly dealing with the power of evil in the lives of all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is where we eventually...
And what does He do? He says, push him back, way back. Get out of that guy and don't ever get in him again. Pushes it back. And so He says, I'm going to stop that from happening. But you see, I can get so caught up in thinking I have to figure out how to make things right and to go at that I could think, well, I'm doing God's will and I'm going to fight against this and fight for this. He's got the job well in hand. He says, use my forgiving love and build bridges and relationships with people on that basis. I planted, Apollos watered, God gave the growth. So we need to know what job God says, I'll take care of that one. You don't have to fly the thing. You don't have to be responsible for all of it. And that's one thing it's a very painful thing to learn in the ministry, that I can tell people the good news of salvation. That doesn't mean they all keep hearing it, or that they ever hear it. And so I'll want them to, I'll try to find every way I can, but I don't necessarily always get across. That's not my job. My job is to make sure they hear it. And to do that in such a way that the good news says there's a restoration about this of what God has done. And that His desire is to restore us to a peaceful relationship with Him. I'm going to take a 5-minute break right now. There is a unisex bathroom right around here. There are other bathrooms upstairs where you came in the door just to the left. So then I'm going to probably take another 15-20 minutes here, and then we'll break out into small groups for a little time. Okay?